Welcome back to the channel. In this episode I'm continuing work on the chines to begin with, taking the starboard side chine out of the boat for shaping off the bench. I've marked up all of the timbers so that I can shape them off the boat, which is going to be significantly easier than doing this in place like I did with the port side. Those two chines can then get epoxy coated and pre-sanded before they go back into the boat, and I can bond those in place permanently. I'm going to be doing a handful of other jobs in this video as well, such as the final shaping of the stringers and some of the work on the keel as well. And then I'm cutting some limber holes which are going to allow water to drain nice and freely through the inside of the boat once it's finished. I'm going to be making a really nice, quick and easy jig for doing this with a hand router. First of all, I've got to start by getting that second side chine shaped and ready to go back in. And if you're new to the channel, I'm a boat builder from the Cotswolds in the UK, and I'm building a boat called Temptress, designed by Michel Barriere and kitted by myself to be built utilising the latest in CAD design, CNC cutting and modern epoxy wood construction. Now, we're all only ever one broken screw away from dealing with a problem like this. I'm sure you guys have had it before if you've forgotten to take screws out before that epoxy's cured a little bit too much, or you just got a bit too much glue on it. This is my typical method for doing that, so I use an old plug cutter, cut around the outside of the screw, and then you can see that just allows me to break all of that timber from around the body of the screw. If you're lucky, you can get right down deep enough to actually get to the glue line and find the bit that's holding that screw in place. There's still plenty of material to remove here, so I could also use a chisel and just duck some of that out so that I was able to get mole grips onto the top of the screw. Now, if you've got a plug cutter that's long enough, sometimes when you do this you can cut deep enough with the plug cutter that the whole screw will just come out in one lump, and then you can replace it. If not, you've got to get mole grips on the top of it and just get that unscrewed. So I'm getting ready to start to take the stringers down. If you remember, there's a little bit of material left on the outside of them. I need to bring those down so that they're flush with the framing, they're nice and fair along their whole length, and then I can start to land some bottom planking onto them. So I'm going to use a batten for this. This is just one of my topside battens that will go in a bit later on. These are a really great candidate for this kind of thing because they're very tight grained, they're nice and fair, so you can get a nice even curvature throughout the length of the timber. What you don't want is something with like knots in it that's going to give you a hard spot in a nice even curve. And that's the whole reason I'm using these for the topside battens. So I can lay this all the way along here, and then I'm going to pick up the outer edge, and I'll also do the inner edge of this as well. Mark a line down that, and then I can shape it with a plane, bring that down to its final dimension, and then once I start to get closer, I'm going to start to put some bottom planks in place and just land them, see how things are looking. So whilst I'm doing this, I can talk a little bit about fairing the bottom. There's been a couple of questions about this, particularly from Bob. He's interested to know about how we can fair the bottom of this framing before we get onto hull planking. Now, in all honesty, the bottom of my boat, and all of it, to be honest, is pretty damn good because I've done the CNC beveling process and I've been meticulous with setup of everything. You know, I'm aiming for accuracy of 1 millimeter or less any given measurement within this boat. So that means that everything is pretty fair. I could plank this straight away. Once I've got these stringers down to size, this is ready to land planking right away without me even really needing to check it. That's a combination of things. That's a combination of me pre-beveling parts, of course, but also being very careful in the setup process. This is the kind of things that you should be doing throughout the process of setting up frames, making sure that things are at the correct height, that lines are nice and fair throughout the boat, particularly from the point at which you're going to start to bond in things like the stringers. Once those stringers are bonded in, those frames are staying wherever they are, and if you've got any highs and lows, inaccuracies, you're past the point at which you can get things right, and then you're into the stage of kind of gluing shims onto frames, cutting frames down, and you're really sort of correcting errors rather than getting things right in the first place. So the way in which we look for that really is getting nice fair timbers like this topside batten and just laying them across the bottom planking. Now certainly even without the CNC beveling process, all the frames in this kind of aft section of the boat, they're very straight. You know, there's next to no bevel on the bottom of these anyway. So you should kind of see this sort of level of fairness even without the pre-beveling process. The beveling process is obviously going to help us a lot more up forward, but back here things are pretty much straight. So as we lay a nice fair batten down onto our framing, this is the type of thing we're looking for. We're looking for, you know, without pushing this down into place, we want to see this nicely landed on all the frames, which is an indication that things are looking good, you know. And as you sight down this, you can see we've got a nice fair curvature. You kind of run your eye. I know I've got this rounded, but if you flip this over, and then you can sight down this sharp corner, you know, kind of run your eye down the length of the boat and sight down that sharp corner. That's really going to highlight to you where you've got any highs and lows, anything that you may potentially need to correct. So as I'm dropping this timber in place, I'm just kind of looking down things. You know, we're touching all the frames just kind of under the timber's own weight. That's really what we want to see. If you've got any little gaps, you know, if I kind of push this up, you can see a little gap there. The reason for that is that I've got a little bit of glue on there. So the first thing I'm going to do is just clean that off, get myself nice and flat, and let it sit under its own weight. So I can't remember how much I talked about it in previous videos. I must have mentioned this when I was standing frames up, but there's, you know, from the minute you're putting these frames, just dry fitting them in place, you want to be doing this really, getting timbers there and just making sure that everything's nice and fair. And at that point you can fault find, you can adjust or tweak the height of frames and things if you need to get things right. This is really what we're looking for in order to get a good fair bottom to the boat. I'll do a little bit of work with some special sanding blocks that I've got for fairing off bottoms, but pretty much all I'm going to need to do on my boat is to knock the glue off these frames and we're ready to go. So I'm very pleased about that indeed. That is a very rewarding part of taking so much time over getting the boat set up. If at this stage you are laying your timbers in place and you're seeing something like that, like a big gap underneath one of the frames and the two frames either side of it are touching it, then something is in the wrong place. It could well be that this frame is too low and that you've not got it at the correct height. It could be that it's too far forward or too far aft. It could be that the two frames either side of it are too high. And that really then becomes a bit of a fault finding mission. You've got to kind of look around, take measurements from various different points on the boat and try and ascertain what has gone wrong. That is going to be the beauty of having access to the 3D CAD model that we do through the dry dock now, so that anybody building this boat can access that 3D model. You can take measurements from any point that you want to. Probably if I was seeing something like that, for example, if that frame was sitting too low like that, the first thing I would do would be to check a handful of heights to make sure this frame's at the correct height. So I would be taking a height from probably this chine down to waterline 1 and use that measuring stick that you might have seen me use a few times just to check heights. I would check the keel as well and I would see if that's correct. If that is at the correct height, the next thing I would do is move on to the frames either side of it and I would check those for height. So let's get this marked and I'll get the stringer shaped. Okay, so I've got that batten down into place. Now you can see I've got this clamped down, but what I've done first is I've let it lay naturally. So you want to make sure that this is a nice fair curve to begin with, because if you just put a timber on here and clamp it all down, if everything's out of place, you're just going to pull it down and follow what you've got there. It's not really going to create the desired effect. But because I know that mine's already pretty damn good, I can do that. So I've got that all nice and flat. You can see we're seated on all the frames well. And then I've got that twist going in forward, which is good. So I can use that now to mark this line here along the run of my outside of my stringer, and I'm going to use that just to take it down to meet my framing. So that's my line to shape to. Probably got 4mm, I would say, to come off the outside of that. The inside's pretty close. It's just the outside that was a little bit out. Used my new yellow marking pencil for this. Can you see that? Nice neat yellow line there on the darker woods. That was quite helpful actually. Someone noticed the other day I got a new pencil because my old one was starting to slip. The lead was slipping and it was a real pain. And the one I got came with these red and green leads. Red and green? Red and yellow leads. So the yellow is actually really good. They're really soft. They're like a wax almost. Yellow is really good for that on darker woods, and I'll probably use the red when it comes to spiling planks and marking lines out that we don't particularly want to mark the wood with. So we'll get there in a bit. Anyway, ready to shape. I'm going to probably grab the power plane to begin with, I think, and start roughing a bit of that off. Then we'll go over to probably a 4.5 hand plane. So that's the pass with the power plane. You can see if you look down those notches, we've got tiny little gaps there still. Just a little bit of material that I've left for the final millimetre or so, which I'll do by hand. Trouble is with the power plane, you just don't have that kind of feel and control that you do with a hand plane. So I'll always do the final bit by hand, but that just gets me somewhere close initially. If you're eagle-eyed, you may have noticed that this notch looks a little bit deeper. I've left that one for a minute just because I don't entirely trust this frame. Just because of the fact that the bulkhead is beveled and this is pretty square. I've got a bit of a feeling that that's a slight undercut. So I've just left myself some material there a minute until I can lay some planks up here and verify that. I've just dropped this in place on the keel. I've got some work to do on the keel, and I knew that was the case because I am again slightly high on the keel. This is quite a good example of what this battens going to tell you. If you look down it, you can see all the places it touches, and then when we get back down aft, you can see my slight high spot. So you can see gap along there, closes up around here, and then gap again back further aft. So I've got just a little bit of shaping work to do on the keel, particularly around this area. So you can see I really don't need to do a lot of work. I've got this plane pretty fine set. I'm only taking small shavings. And 5 or 6 shavings on each of these bays, and I'm kind of coming down. I'm listening for the little click where these gaps are in the notches. I can just hear the plane stop and then start again as it hits the second side of the frame. If I hear that go continuously all the way through, I know I'm starting to take material off that frame, so that's definitely time to stop, because that's when I'm going to blow some timber out there. Ideally I want to stop just a tiny hair below that, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm just fractions of a millimetre low. And you can do a lot of this by feel. You know, I can feel if this plane is riding over a bump, or if it's a nice fair cut all the way through there. A little bit of effort. Obviously the plane wants to be nice and sharp. Just keep an eye on that line to make sure I'm not hollowing out the middle. Keeping an eye on each of these frame notches, and we'll have this done in no time.
So as I'm pulling this plane back, I can feel, just as I draw that back, I can feel the back end of the sole drop down. You can just kind of see there, see I'm able to drop the sole down. So that's telling me there's probably a high spot somewhere around about here that I'm dropping backwards away from. And things like that, you just kind of do it. Once you get used to it, you can do it by feel and find these highs to a pretty accurate degree just by what's going on with your tool. So if I do a bit more work in that area, now as I bring that plane back, it's dropping less. Now I know for a lot of people, drawing a plane backwards is a pet hate. I know the traditionalists definitely get annoyed by that. In my opinion, it gives me better control, it lets me see what's going on, and if it means I've got to sharpen my blade a little bit more often, so be it. That technique works for me, and it saves me getting too tired doing this kind of stuff as well. Do whatever works for you.
So whilst I was doing some of that shaping work on the stringers, I was epoxy coating the chine components to get those ready to be able to bond them into the boat. So same process as always, these get 3 coats of West System 105-207 special clear coating epoxy before they go into the boat. Those get applied consecutively, and then the following day I can sand those back nice and flat. That means that these components are going to be pre-sealed before they go into the boat, and they're also going to be sanded flat, so a lot of the pre-finishing work is done, which means that when I turn the boat over, this is going to be a joy to do the final varnish on inside. Then on to the glue up process. Now, if you've watched any of my recent West System quick guide videos, you'll definitely see some of that practice put into play here in a real life scenario. So we're 2-step bonding these, which means that all the wood first gets wet out with unthickened epoxy, particularly focusing on that end grain areas, which are very absorbent. We'll then cover that with a thickened epoxy after the unthickened has tacked up slightly. And you can see that I've spread that out with a notch spreader here to give me a really even glue application throughout everything. That's going to help me when it comes to cleanup. Once the chine is bonded in place, we'll have nice even beads all around the inside, and that means that it's really quick and easy to get that cleaned up before that epoxy cures.
lot easier before the chine went in. Okay, so as I'm starting to take these stringers down to the final few hairs, I'm basically just kind of taking the glue off this frame now, so I'm getting really close to the frame. This is where I want to be really careful not to be blowing out any of the edges of the frames. So what I've been doing is taking my little Shinto saw file. A lot of people have asked about this actually. This is a saw file, so it's like little saw blades on edge. You've got fine tooth on one side, coarse tooth on the other, and you can just undo it and flip that around based on what tooth you want. I find this really good because it cuts back wood incredibly quickly if you're on the coarse tooth side. It cuts back epoxy with no problem whatsoever, and it doesn't clog as well because you've got this crisscross pattern. Everything just kind of goes through the saw file. So what I've been doing is just running that up the frame line. This is also really good for projecting frame lines on through another piece of timber in the same way that I do it with a saw, where I'll cut a little groove and then use that as my mark to shape down to. So I'm doing this with the saw file, just running up the frame. And you can see what that allows me to do is just to take this final bit right down to the frame. You can see that's perfectly flush there, nice and smooth. And then it just gives me that final little entry, that little bit down either side. So when I do the final bit of plane work, I can start the plane here and I can finish it here. I haven't done that one yet, but you can see the same on 9, look. Got a little mark there, so I can start the plane there, take out that last little bit, join the dots basically between frames, and then I'm not going to risk blowing out any of the grain on those. So that's the plan for the final little bit. Do the same with the keel. We can run up, you can see I've started doing a little bit of work on this keel here where the high spot was, just running a plane along. So getting that keel right is fairly straightforward really. You just want to use the longest plane that you've got. I could probably do with a number 7 actually. It would be helpful to have something a bit longer than this. I'm just running that lengthways along this keel. And that's quite nice because that is telling the same story that my batten was, where it's kind of starting there, finishing there with its cut, and it's taking out the bit that the batten was telling me was too high. So it's always nice when everything tells the same story. So I'll get these filed out and then I'll run plane over the final section of those. Now I've got to get out of this hole.
I just want to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you to everybody on Patreon that is helping me to fund this project. I'm trying to self-fund this boat build, and incurring the costs of a fully operational workshop alongside that is quite a difficult undertaking. I greatly appreciate the additional support that you guys are able to offer, and anything that can help me to earn more money from these videos allows me to be able to create more of this stuff and put it on your screens in front of you. You can get a handful of extras on Patreon, such as merch for various different tiers, early access, ad-free access to these videos, and a couple of extra little things as well. For example, I've just recently done a giveaway where a load of the interesting and unique offcuts that have come from Temptress, I've offered those out for free to patrons. So they'll be soon getting a shipment of some really cool looking offcuts, bits of the ends of the stringers, offcuts from the keel, and various things that are left over that didn't quite make the cut of the boat, but are still an important part of the story anyway. So if you want to check out some things like that, take a look at Patreon, and I'd greatly appreciate any support you're able to offer on there. So a bit more shaping underway. I've got everything brought down now, so we're nice and flush on all of these stringer to frame transitions. I'm really pleased with how this is looking actually. It's come out really nice. I've done some more work on this now that this chine is bonded in. And sighting down that. It's pretty nice. I'm happy with that. There's, as I kind of suspected, this is my suspicious frame. I think this is a little bit low, and what's happened here is that perhaps when this is registered on the CNC, this face wasn't quite far enough this way. So it's caught the forward end of the bevel on the bulkhead here, but then the frame has remained flat. So what I'll do there is just glue a little piece of timber on there, take that frame back up before I plank. It's going to be a couple of millimeters, as you can see there. But I've got everything else faired around it. It's been a lot of hand plane work, as you can see by the state of my floor. Shavings everywhere. So a good tidy up is in order very shortly. Take a look at the plank. It's a little tricky for me to show you, but that's landing really nicely now across all of those and right up to the keel. So I'm really pleased with that. We're ready to go on this side really. Take a look down the planing section of the hull. That's good. This is a selection of the tools I've been using to do all this kind of work. The 5.5, the Stanley 5.5 plane is probably the one I've used most often. You get really good control over that because of the length of it, and you can feel what's going on underneath. The 4.5 is a bit shorter, so I'm using that up in the forward sections of the boat. I go over to my low angle Veritas jack plane just for the final dial in. That's a really smooth cutting plane, and it's dealt with this troublesome grain a bit better. You can see I had this nasty breaky out grain all the way along here, which has been exactly the same no matter which direction I cut, but that's dealt with that a little bit better for the final dial in on that. Block plane, my little apron plane, I used that right up forward at the stem just for really kind of fine stuff at steeper angles. And then this skew plane, which cuts right to the outside of the sole, actually works perfectly for just finishing this up and just taking that down a little bit further, because it allowed me to get right down into that edge, so that works really well for that. You might have seen me using this thing. So this is what I use for sanding framing in the aft section of the boat. It's a board that I made myself, and it's perfectly straight. It's dead straight down its run, nice and rigid, hence these two vertical sections, and it's kicked up at the end, which just allows you to sand framing without the paper catching on the frame as it runs over. So you can see this just kind of skids up and goes over a frame really nicely without wrecking this end. And I tend to, this is maybe a little bit shorter than I'd like, but you want these really so that they span 3 frames at least, and then you can go back and forth. So you sort of focus your effort on the middle, and then you allow the other 2 sides to kind of do this. Works really well, only in straight sections of the boat of course, which this aft section is, but it's good for just knocking that final bit off the framing and getting everything trued up and balanced. And then I've used the curvy bendy board just for doing that up forward. I haven't actually done the framing forward, but I did use it a little bit just to final finish this. So that's a bit of a look at the tools I've been working with for most of this. Saw for the occasional kind of transposing marks through, and the saw file as well.
So we're getting ready for limber holes. It's very helpful having a nice little shelf here now. Limber holes are holes in parts of the framing on the boat that are going to allow water to drain down to one common point. We're not expecting to get any water inside this boat. That's going to very rarely happen, except for perhaps a little bit in the cockpit. But in the eventuality that it does, we want it to drain to a common point so we can pump it out with a bilge pump. We may also want to wash the boat out from time to time inside, and this is going to be set up so that we can quite easily do that. So we need to allow the water to drain so that it doesn't sit in these pockets in each of the individual bays. So the way I'm going to do that on this boat is I'm going to router a channel that goes down through the stringers in this direction, and then we'll have one that runs along through the keel in that direction, which will allow it all to drain down in each of the bays and then aft. And we'll probably put the bilge pump back down aft somewhere over there, I would think. Now I'm going to separate the boat into two compartments, so I'm not going to limber on frame 9. I'm going to leave that as a sealed bulkhead, and I will do them all forwards and I'll do them all aft. That allows me just to separate the engine bay and the cockpit. As I mentioned, cockpit is probably the place that we're most likely to get water in off of people more than anything else, which will drain down through the sole boards and into the cockpit. If I don't limber bulkhead 9, that prevents that water from coming back aft into the engine bay, which we don't want, especially if it's salt water. Wouldn't be the end of the world, but we'll try and avoid it. Also, the very unlikely event that you ever have a oil or fuel leak in the engine, if you keep it separate from the cockpit, it's never going to go forwards and end up in there. So we'll keep that separate, but everything else will get limbered so that we can drain it. So I'm going to try it anyway, this little surfacing bit, which is got a slight radius to it, but a flat bottom as well, so that should give me around about the right shape that I want, and it's a 25mm diameter bit, so it will give me a good size limber hole. I'm going to use a 30mm guide bush on the router, and I've made up this board here which is going to allow me to just run the router down in that slot and push it backwards and forwards. It's going to give me a really controlled cut with this, and it's not going to fly all over the place and wreck my nice framing. I can screw this down so that it can just follow the slight curvature of the frame, and it's going to give me a really stable spot to operate the router base on before. So we'll get this screwed into place. My bit is 25mm, my guide bush is 30mm, which means that my bit is going to cut 2.5mm in from that edge. That is perfect. If I line up this edge here with the edge that I don't want to hit, it should mean that I stay 2.5mm away from it. So I'm just going to set this up around about the middle of the portion I want to cut. I'm going to put this edge lined up with the edge of the frame, face of the frame, and then I'll fix it in place. Let's cut the first one and see what happens. And that's what we have. You can see my slight gap away from the edge, and that's going to give me a nice flat bottom limber hole, slight little radius into there, and that's going to give me plenty of room for clearing bits out. I'm going to go a bit deeper than this. That's just a 5mm pass, so we'll go to 10, and then this little inner edge here, we'll just knock this out with a chisel once we're done. So a couple more passes on that and we'll see what a hole looks like. Okay, so that will do nicely. Very quick and easy, slight little radius on there, which is nice. I'll round off this outer face as well, and obviously we'll epoxy coat these before the bottom planking goes on. But pretty easy with that board. Follows the curvature, and you can't really go wrong with a guide bush. So let's get them done on every frame.
So towards the end of the process, I had this a little bit more refined. I was doing 2 passes, one at 7.5mm and the second one at 15mm. So that was the total depth of my limber holes by the end. And you can see here that I've got the little turn station for the depth stop set up to do both of these passes. So by the end of things, it was very quick. It was probably 20 or 30 seconds, something like that, to cut a limber hole in each frame and then clean it up with the chisel. Really nice, quick process that worked really well all the way throughout the boat. So we are fully limber holed. That worked a treat, that little process. You can see they get a little bit close when you get it forward, so I had to just index the board away from the keel slightly, and these forward two, I think I'll just cut these by hand. I'm probably just going to come straight across there, I expect. Just knock a bit of that out due to the angle. So you can see these worked really well down through the stringers, all in the forward faces. I did this one on 9 because of course we've still got this pocket here that needs to drain down to the keel, and then from there on that'll go forwards into the forward bilge. I've not done 10 because of course that section there is coming out of the boat, so that won't actually live in there anyway. And there we go. So that's the bottom pretty much prepped for planking now, just the other side to mirror what I've done on this one. Hope you've enjoyed this video and found it interesting. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I'll catch you in the next episode where we will be starting to get the shear clamp into the boat and tie the top end of all of those frames in together.